And so yet another installment into the hidden history of the African American fighting man. It's amazing how many people wait for this segment. I'm glad I started my show with that. And I really appreciate you guys seeking more information on the hidden history of the African American fighting man. This is new. It isn't even history for you, is it? It's new. Of course it is. It actually did happen, so I guess one consider that it is history. News to many, particularly those who are African American, and some white supremacists out there. I'm going to take you to Ohio. Ohio used to be the bastion of the Underground Railroad. At one time, there were 20, 30, maybe 100 sites for Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad, as you well know, was utilized by enslaved Americans in the south of the Mason-Dixon line to escape enslavement. By the tens of thousands, they were using the Underground Railroad, and Ohio was a direct trek to the north. It is ironic, ladies and gentlemen, that after the Civil War was over, Ohio became the center of lynchings, racial lynchings, for rather interesting reasons. Reasons was because the coal industry was in dire need of men, and there were a whole lot of recently freed enslaved Americans who were willing to work. Not only that, many of them were being utilized in the factories, and it caused dissension between the Caucasian Ohioans and the recently, should I say, freed Americans. So therefore there was a lot of strife, folks, and there's a lot of history about this. But what you didn't know was that in 1878, Ohio found itself forced to get African American National Guardsmen. You heard me. Many of those were formerly members of the U.S. colored troops. Negroes did not gain full legal equality in Ohio until the Ohio National Guard took out white, W-I-T-E, in quotes, white was removed from the 1866 statute that required all Caucasian males be in their National Guard. Well, you see, it was tough because after the Civil War, let me just tell you, white mobs were roving. Between 18 and 45, let's see, well, I want to get to the malicious. Over here it is. Cincinnati Negroes, under the leadership of William Travis, an African-American naval Civil War veteran, organized in May 1870 an infantry battalion of 4 companies. Here you have it. 5 more African-American infantry companies were organized in 1870 as well. Now, you got to understand, this is after the Civil War. There was a Civil War after the Civil War in Ohio. And these African-American men were sorely needed to put down a significant fight that was going on and brewing, mob violence in Ohio. At one time, 3,647 guardsmen were on active duty patrolling the greatest area under military occupation since the Civil War. You heard me right. All eyes were, in fact, on Ohio. But thank goodness for the fact that you had these African-American guardsmen that on this date in April, on this date back in 1894, a lynch mob had gathered to lynch an African-American who they accused, trumped up charges of raping a white woman. Well, as fate would have it, many African-American guardsmen showed up, and as a result of that, 3 members of the lynch mob were in fact killed, and the African-American man was in fact rescued. No, you've never heard that before. Well, you heard it here. And I would highly recommend that you check it. Please, you should. Because the African-American fighting man has not gotten his due. And that's exactly what he should get. All right, let's get to it. A lot of stuff going on. Talking about the African American fighting man. Things are really becoming a bit curiouser, as if I may, in Nigeria. What actually happened to those Green Beret? Even John McCain now is coming out to say that the president needs to stop lying about it. Well, what? I had no idea that there was any operations going on in Nigeria. It's not one of the banned countries even. Had you heard of anything in Nigeria? Maybe Nigeria, and of course there is some a little comeback going on there in the eastern province, but Nigeria? 3 American Green Beret special ops units were in fact killed, and of course you know the story, or maybe we don't, of Donald John finally, after 2 weeks of the demise of these men, finally acknowledging them in one way, form, or fashion when asked by reporters. And then, of course, you know that Representative Williams was in the car with the widow of La Davis Johnson when she received that phone call from Donald John, and we played that for you in its entirety, and it's a horrible thing. Ms. Williams indicated that Donald John said, well, he volunteered for this, and these things happen, I guess, and of all the things to say to a young grieving mother, that's not it. Everyone knows that's not it, and when you hear oxy-conservatives come out and try to make sense of it, you can't help but look at them sideways and go, would you say that to me too? In other words, I can listen to the spoken word, and I heard what he said. And then just yesterday, again, folks, the liar lies. That's what you should expect. Donald John sent $25,000 to a man, the Gold Star father. He had lost his son in Afghanistan back in June. Mr. Baldridge. He finally sent $25,000 of his own personal money to Mr. Baldridge. Now, this is ironic primarily because it was only after the Washington Post printed the story. After talking to Mr. Baldridge, Chris Baldridge. He had explained that Donald John had contacted him and said, hey, look, I'm going to give you $25,000 out of my own personal money. Write you a check. And he went on to say that Donald John said that this is something that no one else will do. This is back in June. And don't get me wrong, I think it's an honorable thing. And this stuff like this should not come out. It really shouldn't, folks. Politicizing things like this, to me, it's insulting. Be it Donald John, be it Obama, whomever. When I can remember Rumsfeld doing a rubber stamp on the dear families, the grieving families, indicating the regrets, sending his regrets, and he would rubber stamp it. It actually would, instead of signing each one of those regrets. And at the time, the Afghan conflict was very early on. Not many were killed, comparatively speaking, if one looks at World War II. And there he is with a rubber stamp, stamping it rather than signing it himself. And of course, he came forward and in his own way indicated, well, okay, yeah, I did. And Bush took him to task for it, and it was corrected. But not this guy, not the guy that we have in the White House right now. So the Washington Post put forward Mr. Baldridge and indicated Mr. Baldridge had, they talked to Mr. Baldridge, and Mr. Baldridge said what Donald John had done. And then all of a sudden, the check has been sent yesterday. There was the same situation when he promised during the election to make a donation to the veterans. Remember that out in, I think, in Arizona? And 6 weeks thereafter, no donation, and the press says, well, what about the donation? Did you send the donation? Give us oh, yeah, well, we're sending it out today. I mean, come on, folks. You know what this is all about. The guy politicizes literally any and everything, and this is not a put down. This is just accurate. I'm going to write you a check out of my personal account for $25,000, says Mr. Baldridge, that Donald John had told him, and he said, I was just floored, Mr. Baldridge. I was floored. He said, Trump continued, I could not believe he was saying that, said Mr. Baldridge, and I wish I had it recorded because the man did say this. He continued, no other president has ever done something like this, but he said, I'm going to do it. That sounds like Donald John. He said, Donald John said, no other president has done this, but I'm going to do it. I don't know whether they have or have not, and I would have much rather all of this had been in confidence. I mean, this is a grieving father here, ladies and gentlemen. But don't say you're going to do something and don't do it. So needless to say, yesterday, how many months is it? That was June, so what are we talking about? 5 months? Check was sent out yesterday. The White House spokesperson said that the check has been sent and it has been in the pipeline since the president's conversation with Mr. Baldridge. It's in the hands who believe that. Really. How difficult is it when you can say you're going to write a personal check? You're going to write a personal check. You don't think the president can write a personal check? Mr. Billionaire. By the way, I think we had someone talked about Forbes. A person called and didn't know the difference between personal wealth and wealth. At that time, he was referring to Forbes. We'd gone through it before. Donald John was quoted, was stated by Forbes to have somewhere around $270 million in personal assets and cash. 270 million, not a billion. But be it as it may, now he's fallen 100 points on the Forbes list. I wonder why. Not that that makes a difference to me. People like this, ladies and gentlemen, camouflage their earnings, which is why the man could, quote unquote, lose $1 billion and not pay taxes for 5 years, but yet still be a millionaire. They camouflage it. They hide it, basically between here and Russia. I'm just saying. So the $25,000 check has been sent to Mr. Baldridge, and Mr. Baldridge is certainly thankful that he's going to get that, and to which I say great. Sad that it took the press to press him. I guess that's why they call it the press. It's really quite pathetic, to be quite frank. Mississippi, we're in big trouble, grave trouble as it applies to politics. There's an election, senatorial election. Next year, Roger Wicker, the incumbent, is going to be challenged, no doubt. But I have very serious concerns as to the health of one Thad Cochran, Senator Thad Cochran, recently elected last year. I think he's back on Capitol Hill. But my sources tell me that he is extraordinarily frail and in some cases disoriented. And although I would hope for the best for him, health-wise, I don't doubt that there is some discussions going on right now as to whether he will complete his term and what will happen if he doesn't. Watch that very closely. Look, I'm meandering through this stuff as I get to it, folks. I promise you, because I've got some big fish to fry. There it is. That elementary school there up in Jackson. The Jeff Davis Baccalaureate whatever school changed the name to Obama. How about that? That's a good plus for dear old Mississippi now, isn't it? I think so. Particularly on the heels of this banning To Kill a Mockingbird thing. And I'm going to get to that in a minute, but I want to, because the person who complained about that book now, looking at the local paper, has been revealed, and she and her mother was quoted as to why, and we're going to get into that in just a little bit. But before I get to that, I want to talk about this. Shaun King. Shaun King was on, I think, Tom Joyner this morning, and he finally arrived at what I thought he should have, and that was getting someone told is not the same as getting something done. And my compliments. We don't have a piece for that. We can't play that right now. Okay. I don't have my sheet either. I need to post the audio up there, whatever you have there. But Shaun made it very, very clear that, hands up, don't shoot, throwing your hands up and doing whatever you do. First there's a protest, and then there's the action. Sometimes they're one and the same. There's a call to action, and then there's a mobilizing. And then there is the strategy. Well, you actually have a strategy, but then you put forward your strategy. You see, ladies and gentlemen, power concedes nothing without demand, says Frederick Douglass, and there has to be a demand. Has to be. And once there's a demand, then what you and I, and those individuals who seek to protest or to dissent about, there has to be resistance, right? By either words or blows or both. That is exactly how everything that has changed in America has changed in America, going back to the Mayflower. I know some of you would like to pray on it and pray it away, but trust me on this, the Pilgrims did not come here with guns just because they were depending on the Lord's hand to come down and protect them from what they call the savages. I'm just saying. There is something to be said for being able to defend yourself. And the best defense sometimes is a good offense. And sometimes African Americans don't know how to play offense. Tell that to Colin Kaepernick. Got to call that play, brother. But at any rate, Shaun came forward and he basically, laid it out in stark terms. That there's got to be a mobilization of those individuals who are seeking to cure things. In other words, it's not America's problem. It's your problem. It's your problem with this individual, this entity, this department, this precinct, this sheriff, this deputy. And you got to deal with that. You got to deal with that. Unless you're prepared to indict all Americans for your problem and then demand from all America because of your problem and seek a strategy to combat all Americans by taking a knee and thereby arrive at curing your problem, unless you're going to get there the way you're protesting, and trust me on this, you're going to find yourself only taking a knee. There's a strategy. And Shaun King spelled it out. And if you get a chance to read this op-ed piece, then you need to do that, or listen to his piece there that he did. And he basically, almost as if he listened to the show, bro? And understood that it's not criticism, it's constructive criticism that I'm giving. I think the guy is incredibly smart. But there is a framework. There's a framework whereby you get things done. Look, folks, hang on. And this is not a black or white thing, in quotes. You do realize there was a strategy in Boston to resist the Stamp Act. The whole taxation without representation, and then, of course, the Bostonians going in and throwing the tea into the Boston Harbor. That's a protest. It is civil disobedience. That's what it was. It was sending a message to King George that no, you're not going to tax us on this tea. So what they did was they said, their tax once the tea comes off of the ships, because tea was a big thing then. I want you to know you want to drink some tea. You know what I mean? The tea was like that crack at the time. You know what I'm saying, bro? You get that tea, it's like crack. The Brits drink a lot of tea. Mm-hmm. Spot of tea. Well, the colonists realized that they weren't taxed until the tea came off the ship. So they wanted to send a message to King George and not be taxed. They threw the tea in the Boston Harbor, so that we all going to suffer. Now, granted, once you buy the spot of tea, then of course you're going to pay the taxes on it. Or go buy some bags, you're going to pay the taxes on it. So rather than pay the taxes on the tea, damn the tea, they threw the tea away. See how that works? Now, ladies and gentlemen, you can apply the same thing to what happened in Montgomery with African Americans not riding the bus. Taxation without representation, you see. Same thing can be applied to Ferguson. Everybody there paid sales tax. Even Mike Brown paid it when he went to get those, what was it, Black and Miles. Oh, by the way, he did pay for the Black and Miles. I don't know if you realize that. That was about a little bit more than Black and Miles, trust me. So yeah, he's paying sales tax, and the city gets a fair share of that sales tax, but yet they're not equally represented when it comes to justice, and certainly not on the police department. So they're being taxed and not being represented. Same situation. Young people don't get that, though, and I think Shaun tapped on it today. You got to get that. You've got to tie, whereas if you're being mistreated by a government entity, let's just say, law enforcement, guards at a jail, or a judge, if you're not being fairly represented, then it's within your power, and I don't mind telling you, it is your civic duty to correct it. Not blame the rest of us in America, but correct it. How do you do that? You organize, you get your people, and you vote, and you put forward an ordinance that will protect you, that will stop whatever happening from happening. It's a fact. You organize. That's what the organization, be it the NAACP, SCLC, all of those organizations, SNCC, all of them were born out of what I'm saying. There is a framework for how to get it done. Shaun didn't touch on that, but it's readily available. You organize, you mobilize, and you solve it. Organize, mobilize, and solve it. There you go. That's the formula. It happened in Boston. Now, don't get me wrong. Be prepared. Because sometimes the solution, ladies and gentlemen, and listen closely, either solve things in this country either by the ballot or the bullet. The revolution was the bullet. Civil War was the bullet. They could not solve it by way of the ballot. Let's hope that that doesn't happen again. All eyes right now on the University of Florida. My sources tell me that the militia showed up 3 days ago. This guy Spencer is going to be speaking there. Mr. Alt-right, neo-Nazi, right-wing, white supremacist, destruction of America, Spencer. What they advocate, what he advocates, is an America without Negroes, or any of the other O's. And so now they're loaded for bear. A state of an emergency now is in Florida. Now, my sources also tell me, ladies and gentlemen, that because the militia were there, they are not disarmed. The National Guard has been called out. There's been a tenfold increase in the amount of police there. And it could be the spark that launches the next civil war in this country. And I don't mean that to exaggerate. I'm not. But what I am telling you is that what I saw, and I went back again, bro, and I looked at those films that came out of Charlottesville, many of the 300 militia that were available there did in fact have bump stock and slide stock modifications on their AR-15s or AKs, which meant what you saw and heard happen in Las Vegas, Nevada, could happen there. Now, folks, there's no other way to handle this, in my view, than disarmament. Now, I want to make that very clear. As a gun owner myself, someone shows up for this event, even if they're not on campus, if they're around this event, and calling themselves militia and so-called keeping the peace, that person has to be disarmed. Period. You want to debate with me on that, please do. But if law enforcement do not get a handle on this, trust me, there will be all-out war. Congress needs to pass the law making that modification not only illegal, but have a stiff penalty for those who would even own it, and particularly those who use it. Look, automatic weapons is an equalizer with law enforcement. With a weapon that can fire 200 rounds in as little as 15 seconds, let me tell you something, you can hold an entire army at bay, and there are in excess of 300 or more militiamen, at least 200 according to my sources, came in from out of town, many of them from the Panhandle. There were at least, according to the intelligence report from Mark Potok, Southern Poverty Law Center, right there in the Panhandle, you have close to 20 militia groups in and around the Florida swamps there, Gainesville, Tallahassee, out from Pensacola, little small hamlets there that I'm just telling you. That's why Governor Scott called out the militia, asked for had a state of emergency, because he understands what's happening. And what gets me about this is that there are reasonable thinking Americans who see this as just free speech. This is sedition, folks. Look, this is no doubt. Look, what Spencer wants is a white country, end quotes. That's what he wants, and by any means necessary. Now, if you think that a person espousing that is not inciting a riot, think again. Just by that, one can argue. And then he shows up with a standing army. Serious business here. That's very serious business. And it's business that, put it this way, I think is by design. Which brings me to this, the Russian involvement. Yeah, it's not a hard. I think a lot of this, and this sowing the seeds of discontent racially, is something that the Russians are tapping into. If it's one thing to divide America, and that resulted in the Korean conflict stopping or getting an armistice, was that. The one thing that hindered Vietnam was, in fact, the racial conflicts. A country, a house divided cannot stand, says one Abe Lincoln, and he's right. You want to know what happened during the Vietnam conflict? Racial strife, first and foremost. Same thing happened during the Korean conflict. The Russians get that. And so that's why you had this incredible effort on their part now. And I know you've seen this, Ro, whereby the Russians were actually utilizing Facebook and actually had something called Black Fist, showing African Americans preparing for self-defense classes and suggesting that their Black Lives Matter. They're going after cops. And they would run this or post this in areas and on Facebook pages, particularly of Caucasians and African Americans. Caucasians to sow some fear and get them to rush to vote for Donald John. African Americans to show some indifference. Oh, I vote. I'm gonna take it to the streets. And look, did you see the African Americans on CNN and on the TV shows coming out saying that they were paid $300 a month to just do this and take recordings? Then, of course, there's the rapper who the Russians paid to do a rap that said Black Lives Matter, blah blah blah. There was black something. It wasn't Black Lives Matter, but it was equated with Black Lives Matter. Because I kept trying to figure out, well, what is this Black Lives Matter thing, and why do you hear actually conservative talk show hosts going, oh, yes, the movement, and they're coming to get you, and that fueled a certain kind of support from the Spencers of the world for one Donald John. And I'm going to go on record right now to say that it did. The reason why Donald John was elected was, in fact, because of the Russian collaboration and coordination, as Comey would say. Yes, there was collusion. Now it's come out that these guys, both Tales of the Crypt, what's her name, his staffer, yeah, and his son, Beavis or Butthead, one of the others, and both of these folks retweeted the information provided by Russian trolls. Retweeted it. In other words, a lot of this stuff was trumped up. Yeah, it was fake news, but I told you, when Donald John accuses someone else of doing something, he's doing it. This is how you do it. He does it every time. And for those who are willing to not ask, well, why would you say that? So those of you who are gullible, you just eat it up. So there was the coordination. And I mean, when it came down to strongholds. In other words, there were areas where Donald John needed to motivate folks. And so therefore the Russians came up with the algorithms necessary to put out just the kind of information to drive that hick out of the woods and into the voting booth. Or in some cases, to convince young African Americans, because they put out stuff regarding Bernie, that it's no sense in your voting right now. I mean, look, it's propaganda. There's no doubt about that. But it was coordinated propaganda to get their guy to win. Their guy won. I'm saying won. He did. He won as a result of this coordination and collusion with Russia. You feel good about that, America? Jeff Sessions, let's see, Jeff Sessions Clement. There you go. Granny, one would call it. He is Granny, there's no doubt about that. Beverly Hillbillies. They asked him, okay, about so you're going to tell us whether or not there was a Russian, you guys talked about, you understand that when he was seeking to be confirmed, he omitted the fact that he had chatted with the Russian ambassador at least 3 times. I get confused. So he was asked, well, okay, so did you and the president talk about Russians before this? And all of that's confidential. I refuse to answer that question because it's all confidential. I want you to clear the air. If there's no there, then say what. I mean, we're talking about Russians here, folks. The same Russians that won Donald John the moron bragged about firing another American, his own FBI director, very gleefully. And then it was the Russians who released the information. He refused to have any reporters in. So the Russians came out just to show what a moron he is. He's going to trust the Russians? That, ladies and gentlemen, is why I call him the Manchurian moron president. It's incredible. And I hadn't even got to Little Bootsy yet. I'll tell you this. He's doing exactly what he should do. Except for one thing. He did not file charges against the security guard at Dillard's who assaulted him. Should have done that day. Hang on. Like to cover a short period of time. Ocean Eyes, you're next. We'll be back.